The story begins with a man emerging from the manhole, seemingly trying to escape from someone, and runs toward a taxi as fast as he can but falls onto the ground in a rush. The taxi driver comes to help him, but he is also terrified by the lurking werewolf in the manhole and gets away, leaving the man to die. The werewolf pulls the hapless man into the manhole while a musical show goes on in the concert hall. Now, we see Andy and his friends Brad and Chris heading for Paris. A beautiful young woman passes by them, catching Andy and his friends' attention. Chris tells Andy and Brad that the girl smiled at him, then Andy explains that she is not interested in any idiots like them. Chris challenges Andy to take the girl's phone number, and then Andy says that she is not his type. Afterward, they all arrive in Paris and secretly descend on the Eiffel Tower. Andy feels relieved after having a bird's-eye view of the city, as if his dream has come true, and shortly after, he starts making his preparation to jump off the Eiffel Tower, while Brad and Chris ask him to stop doing this, but Andy has made up his mind to prove his manhood, and just then, they hear the noise coming from below, forcing Andy and his friends to hide before anyone comes up. Moments later, a young woman named Serafini arrives there, filling tears in her eyes, appearing to be sad, and while looking at the sky, she gets on the fence to jump off the tower, but just in time, Andy approaches her, asking her not to do so. Nonetheless, she doesn't listen to him and jumps off the tower to give up her life. Andy also jumps from the tower to save her without caring for his life. The rope was also about to go down, but Chris and Brad manage to hold onto it, while Andy saves Serafini from falling to death. In the course of saving her, one of the shoes of Serafini is left in Andy's hands. Andy's friends pull him up, but his head bumps into an iron bar of the tower, causing him to faint. Andy regains consciousness in the hospital and finds his friends sitting and concerned about him. Andy tells his friends that he fell for Serafini at first sight while holding her shoe in his hand. Afterward, Brad and Chris begin to search for Serafini in the entire city at Andy's request, while Andy spots Serafini in the hospital in nurse's disguise. He quickly gets out of the bed and starts looking for her to return her shoe. Shortly after, he catches her attention, but just then, a doctor opens the door, causing him to fall onto the floor, but in the meantime, Serafini vanishes into thin air. Chris shows the whereabouts of Serafini to Andy, making him feel relieved. Moments later, Andy and his friends arrive at Serafini's house. Andy knocks on the door, and Serafini answers it. Andy tells her that she had forgotten to take back her shoe the night when he saved her. Serafini grabs her shoe with the bloodied hands, leaving Andy stunned. She humbly asks Andy and his friends to leave, but Andy asks her why her hands are stained with blood, and she replies that she is just redecorating the cellar. Andy tells her that he just wants to have a word with her, and afterward he will never disturb her. She agrees to meet him and asks him to come at 4 o'clock in front of the concert hall. Andy arrives at the concert hall dressed up like a gentleman, and not long after, Serafini also comes there, riding the bicycle, and then, they both come to a cafe, starting their conversation. Serafini reveals that her parents are dead and she is all by herself. Just then, she notices a note in Andy's hands, realizing his intention for her. She then tells Andy that most guys who ask her on a date usually try to take her to the bed, and why she should think he is different from them. In the course of taking out a napkin, Andy mistakenly takes out all the condoms he had in his pocket, causing Serafini to make a negative image about Andy. Andy pretends that these are just chewing gums and they look like condoms, and are very common in the United States. Serafini begins to tear a packet, but Andy snatches it and begins to chew it to make her believe it is no more than a chewing gum. Serafini asks him to blow a big bubble for her because it's a custom in France that the bigger the bubble, the more a boy likes a girl. So, Andy begins to blow a bubble with the condom. Meanwhile, a waiter approaches Andy inquiring him about the condom. One of the customers approaches Andy and begins to misbehave with him, but Serafini throws him flying far away, leaving everyone in great astonishment. Andy goes after her, while she rides her bicycle without answering him. Moments later, Andy begins to leave thinking Serafini isn't interested in him, but Serafini stops him and goes to kiss him, but in the end she stops herself and begins to leave while telling him she can't meet him anymore, as she cares about him. Andy, Chris and Brad come to Serafini's house, only to find Claude at her house. Chris tells him they are looking for Serafini. Claude replies that she isn't at home. Then, Andy and his friends begin to leave but are stopped by Claude, who invites them to a full moon party tonight if they are not doing anything tonight. Furthermore, Serafini will also be there. Andy, Chris, and Brad arrive at the place where the full moon party is going on but can't find Serafini there. Then, Chris asks Andy to stay at the party and he will go to see Serafini whether she is at home or not. Chris knocks on the door but no one answers it, causing him to look for other ways and soon finds Serafini locked up inside the prison. He enters the basement through the window while Serafini asks him where his friends are. Chris replies, they are at Claude's full moon party and they are waiting for her. Having heard this, she quickly asks Chris to free her as his friend's life is in jeopardy. Brad and Andy have fun at the party. Chris comes around, finding himself inside the prison. Serafini arrives at the party, startling Andy, and begins to leave with him, catching Claude's attention. Chris takes off his clothes and tries to get hold of the key using his clothes, while Serafini throws Andy into the tunnel and asks him to flee before it's too late, while throwing bricks at him. Some people start turning into werewolves in the middle of the party, and elsewhere, Serafini also starts turning into a werewolf while continuously looking at the moonlight, and a short while later, she turns into a full-fledged werewolf. At the party, a pack of werewolves have started massacring the people, creating a stampede. Brad looks for Andy in the tunnel holding a lantern in his hand. Chris manages to get out of the cell and approaches the tent, as something was growling inside. He peeps into the tent only to find a werewolf inside. Finding his life in danger, Chris does his best to escape the basement and manages to do it. Brad encounters a werewolf in the tunnel, who butchers him in the twinkling of an eye. Andy also stumbles upon a werewolf in the tunnel while looking for a way out. The werewolf attacks him but Andy manages to injure him with an iron bar as well, and shortly after, he escapes the tunnel through a drain pipe, but while making his escape, he got bitten by the same werewolf. The next morning, he wakes up finding himself lying in bed. Serafini prepares a healthy juice out of 2 human hearts. Afterward, she approaches him with the same glass of juice and asks Andy to drink it as it will give him power, but Andy doesn't drink it and begins leaving, saying something weird is going on here. Claude captures Chris, revealing he loves Americans. Andy arrives at the tavern where the full moon party was held last night, and finds corpses. Among them, he sees the dismembered body of his friend Brad as well. While strolling on the streets in the town, Andy now can even hear the distant sounds, which make him restless. He arrives at a restaurant and eats like an animal, and meanwhile, a young woman enters the restaurant, catching Andy's attention. Andy approaches the girl, who introduces herself to him as Amy Finch. Afterward, Amy and Andy begin to have food, but just then, Andy finds the decapitated head of Brad in the saucer, causing him to get agitated. He rushes to the washroom and finds Brad there too. Brad reveals to Andy that he is also bitten, but Andy isn't ready to accept that he has become a werewolf. Andy and Amy exit the hotel, while a man with his dog stalks him. Shortly after, Andy and Amy start making love. After a while, Andy's body begins to heat, forcing him to jump into the nearby fountain. Amy puts on her clothes and starts looking for Andy, but he is nowhere to be found. Moments later, Andy, who is now a werewolf, emerges from the fountain, scaring Amy away, and shortly after, he starts chasing her to feast on her. Panicked Amy runs here and there to save her life. However, she is attacked and eventually killed by Andy. A cop shoots Andy, but he is also brutally killed by the full-fledged werewolf. Andy comes around naked on the street with the carcass of a dog and gets arrested by the police. A police officer shows Andy the dead bodies of Amy Finch and the man who was stalking Andy in the morgue, but due to an important piece of work, the police officer has to leave. The dead body of Amy comes back to life, telling Andy that she is cursed to remain a restless spirit until he dies. Just then, Brad's spirit also arrives there and they both help Andy escape the morgue. Andy asks Brad if there is any other way that he can become human again. Then, Brad reveals, first find the werewolf that bit him, then kill it and eat out its heart. Amy tries to get Andy run over by a bus in order to get salvation, but Brad saves him, which leads to a verbal fight between Amy and Brad. Meanwhile, Claude and his men kidnap Andy and take him to their hiding place. Claude shows Andy his captured friend Chris and asks him to kill him, but Andy refuses to do so. Instead, he attacks Claude's gang, but soon, he is captured again. Meanwhile, Serafini shows up, knocks down the door and flees with Andy while spilling gasoline along the way and then setting the tunnel on fire to keep off Claude and his men. Afterward, they both jump into the sewer that leads to the basement of Serafini's house. She shows him her stepfather, Thierry. She tells Andy that 2 months ago, Thierry had discovered a serum to suppress her lycanthropic cycle and only it had the reverse effect. I immediately transformed into a werewolf, forcing Thierry to escape through the underground, and when I came to, I saw, I had already butchered my own parents, and this is the reason why I was trying to kill myself that night. Moments later, Claude and his men burst into Serafini's house in search of Andy. However, Andy had already escaped the house as soon as he saw them. Claude and his men also go after him. Andy reaches Serafini's house where she is trying to bring her stepfather back to life as he is her last hope. However, she couldn't save her father, telling Andy, Claude and his stooges killed him. Claude arranges a party to celebrate American Independence Day, luring Andy and other American people. Andy sneaks into the church and stands on the podium, telling all the people that their life is in big danger. So leave this building right now, but the ignorant people begin to throw litter at him, considering him to be a fool, and drive him away. Meanwhile, a few people, wearing black robes, get into the hall and start putting out the torches, and afterward, they begin to inject some kind of dose into their bodies, while Claude continues to misguide the people. Moments later, all the people wearing black robes start turning into dreadful werewolves, striking fear into people's hearts, and causing them to run for their lives. In the meantime, police arrive there, trying to save the common people. Serafini bulldozes the door, ruining everything inside the church. In the course of this affray, Andy also shoots down a fleeing werewolf. After that, he comes into the basement in search of Claude, while keeping his gun at the ready. A terrifying werewolf attacks and butchers 2 lady police officers in the basement, while Serafini witnesses this killing, prompting the werewolf to pursue her. On the way, she comes across the dead body of a werewolf with a dose tied around his forearm. She takes the dose and injects it into her body. Afterward, she and the other werewolf get into a fierce fight. One of the werewolves brutally kills the other one. Just then, Andy arrives there hearing the scream, and shoots the victorious werewolf multiple times, forcing it to escape into the tunnel. Andy follows it and discovers that he shot Serafini, mistaking her for Claude. Serafini urges Andy to free her from this insufferable pain, but Andy isn't willing to do so as he loves her very much. Right then, the police arrive there. Andy leaves promising, everything will be alright very soon. Claude gets on the train, scaring away all the passengers, and shortly after, he turns into a normal human as he is badly injured. He starts taking another dose, but just then Andy bursts into the compartment through the window, halting the process. During the lethal fight, Andy spots a mark on Claude's shoulder, revealing, Claude is the one that bit him in the tunnel, and after that, Andy injects the dose into his body, causing Claude to get away, but meanwhile, Andy starts transforming into a vindictive werewolf, and before all the passengers on the train, Andy savagely kills Claude. Several full moons later, Andy and Serafini tie the knot. Chris opens the box containing the ring, but it accidentally slips out of the box and falls off the Statue of Liberty. Andy and Serafini also jump off the statue to recover the ring. Andy manages to grab it and puts it on Serafini's finger.